Hello and welcome to the very first and possibly last episode of
Puppet Masters of History,
where I will try and distill things that will be helpful to you into some sort of historical video. Some of you might be familiar with the 5-minute histories, well this one is even shorter at 4 minutes and 99 seconds, which gives you a whole extra second to contemplate life in a world where Trump is president. Keeping the video short also means that I can maintain the high quality production values that you will come to know and love. This is me, or at least this is what Google says is me, and so therefore I'm going to continue with this and introduce you to some of the major players in the British scene. So without further ado, everything revolves really around this man, James II, who had 4 mistresses and no children until much more later on in his life. He was a Catholic king in a Protestant country, and this made everybody mad. Worse, he kept trying to make it easier for Catholics, inviting back the Jesuits, starting Catholic schools, and trying to allow Catholics to take up positions in government. And he forced the English to read this out in their churches, in something that's called the Declaration of Indulgences. This was the final straw, so the English invited over a Dutchman, a man by the name of William of Orange. He happened to be married to James's daughter, Mary, who was, luckily, a Protestant, as was William. So everybody crossed their fingers, William crossed swords, and England had a Protestant king and a queen again. This made some people very unhappy, and this is known as the Great Revolution, although that might depend on whom you ask. The first main group are the Jacobites. Jacobites are called that because they supported James, and if you can figure that one out, you're pretty smart. Just kidding. James, through linguistic devilry, is the translation of the Hebrew Jacob, or Jacob, which was translated into Latin Jacobus, which then got twisted by the cheese-eating surrender monkeys into Chemers, and then into English as James. Well, probably. It doesn't really matter, and you don't really care, do you? The Jacobites are generally Scottish, but some came from North England and some were Irish, and they believed a number of things that were quite important, at least to them. Firstly, the divine right of kings, the idea that you have your right to rule from God, that kings were accountable to God alone, in other words, you didn't have to listen to any pesky parliaments. Hereditary right, in other words, if you had children, they inherited the throne. And lastly, the scriptural injunction to non-resistance and passive obedience. As you might guess, they thought that James and his sons were the rightful kings. Next come the Tories. Now, the Tories, the name Tory is actually, like Whig, a term of abuse. It comes from the Irish meaning an outlaw or a robber. They originally supported James II against the Whigs in what was known as the Exclusion Crisis of 1678 to 81, and this is where both groups come from. They are generally monarchist supporters against a strong parliament. They also happen to be strong supporters of the Church of England. They were somewhat discredited by the Whigs because there was a Jacobite rising in 1715 and they kind of fell out of favour until about 1760 when George III comes back into power. Next come the Whigs. And these... Oh, no, not that one. Next come the Whigs. Here we go. The Whigs are originally, and again, it's a term of abuse, meaning a cattle driver. They believed in a number of quite important things and were generally opposed to what the Jacobites believed in, which is quite nice. Here they are. They believed in constitutional monarchism. See, I can't even say the words. Monarchism. This meant that as a king you could only operate within a certain number of parameters defined by a constitution. They also were against absolute rule, so the idea that you simply just can't decide that you're going to do something as a king. You have to operate properly. They're also against the Stuarts, and so because they're against the Stuarts, that means they're against Catholics, and therefore they're against all sorts of things that have to do with Catholics, like popery and Jesuits. Those are the Whigs. And so here ends our first little video. I would suggest that you keep reading your textbooks, keep reading your source books. I am always available for questions and Skype sessions, and if you keep doing all of this, I'm sure that you'll be